Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Demand Decoded. This live event series decodes the secrets to successful B2B marketing. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And we're Blend, a B2B website and demand generation agency. Today, I'm joined by Jasmine, senior strategist and a certified UX designer at Blend, to talk about a topic that I really enjoy, which is UX, website UX. And we're going to share some killer tips for optimizing yours for your demand generation today. Feel free to ask your questions so that we can answer them as we go along. The questions we receive help to stimulate some really interesting conversations and hopefully provide you with some specific insight. So please do just put them into the comments and we'll discuss them as we go along. So to get us started, Jasmine, why don't we begin by explaining to viewers why it's important, nay, essential, to create an intuitive, effective website user experience in the first place?
So, Phil, having a good website means that people who visit it get something out of being there. And if we have a really crappy website, people are going to leave again. And that's a sort of the complete polar opposite what we want to be doing when we create demand. We want to be able to capture and convert that demand. So having a good intuitive website, offering good user experience that makes it easy for people to navigate around on the site, that's going to make sure that they keep on the site, engage with the content, and end up converting or doing the kind of actions that we would like them to do as the website visitors.
Yeah, absolutely. From my perspective, it's if you're going to go to the trouble, the effort to create some demand for your service, not specifically your own, but the service sector that you represent, because ultimately demand can't be created for one business alone. If you're going to go to the effort to create demand, it's really important that you're able to capture that demand when people discover you in the research process. When we talked before on this subject, you had some really good examples of how different UX needs to be for different audiences and the brands serving them. Do you want to go over some of those perhaps?
Yeah, certainly. So I think one key thing to know is that when we are trying to engage with website visitors or users or buyers, when they're in the researching phase of trying to find what products and services they want to use and buy from, they are going to be comparing you with different competitors. So if we take something like Teams, Slack, and Discord, they are in essence the same service. They have a kind of a chat feature, some kind of functionality that connects with other softwares, and they allow you and your teams to communicate efficiently and integrate with all your different kind of softwares. And if I, as a business, am trying to go out and look for which of these solutions do I want to use, I am going to be going to their websites as part of my fact-finding mission and process in the buyer journey. And based off of what I see there, I'm going to form an opinion about what kind of products and services they offer and if it's right for me. So this fits into the whole user experience things where UX can it's a Venn diagram of lots and lots of different things. So it's the branding, it's the design, it's the way that you engage and interact with the website, but also the kind of messaging and information that you can get when you're on there. So anyone listening or joining in now, if you just open a couple of tabs and you go to those websites, so Microsoft Teams, Slack, and Discord, you're going to see that they are very, very different in the way that they present themselves, but the building blocks, so the very fundamental elements of how they present these pieces of information that's vastly different, is the same. So the user experience of being on the website and finding information is going to be essentially the same. And that's because as website visitors, we have very limited attention spans. I'm not going to go to one of these websites and try to figure out a very funky looking navigation or trying to find where I need to go to get the information I'm wanting. So having that user experience in mind, just saying that simplify things, make it easy for you to find the information, understand if this product is meant for you, that's part of the bigger picture of good UX.
I think you've made some really interesting sort of ideas there about what user experience is in the first place, which is it's a very broad topic and it includes brand aspects, messaging, what information you present and how, in addition to the more detailed or technical oriented aspects of UX/UI, I suppose. And also the fact that intuitive is a key value within that, isn't it? Is that buyers, as they visit websites, seek intuitive experiences that they can instinctively pick up and operate, as opposed to something they've got to learn and figure out how to interact with. So it sounds to me intuitiveness is a key guiding principle when you're thinking about your website user experience, but uniqueness, or more accurately, suitability is a key value when you think about messaging and your brand.
Definitely. So I think if we take another example and bring it offline, away from websites, it's still applicable to website, and we think about hotels. So if we visit a Hilton hotel or Holiday Inn, the basic building blocks of what they offer and what you see and experience when you step into that lobby is going to be the same. You go up to reception area, you check in, you get your key card, go to the lift, elevator, and then go up to your floor and check into your room. That is going to be the same. It's the same building blocks. But when you're there, the branding and the design and all of those elements, they breathe and feel and give you different perception of what a stay at the Hilton or a stay at the Holiday Inn is going to be. So when we talk about UX websites, it's, again, I'm going to be reiterating this over and over again, basically, but it's the same idea where these basic building blocks should be intuitive. People need to know, they are going to know from previous experience where they should go look for the reception area or the navigation of the website, if you will. We don't want to offer them shocking surprises. We can have some slight deviation on the theme, but we wouldn't want to put a jack in the box in the middle of the lobby, for example, and say, go speak to their AI robot instead of a human, because people are not going to know what to do. Same thing with websites.
Well, that
not to
AI
bash on AI, but
I was going to say that might be coming. But no, I think you're absolutely right. Really interesting. I don't think I've ever compared website UX to the hotel check-in experience, but it's a great analogy. It's a great way to think about it, because you're right. Intuitiveness is really valuable there, just as it is when a buyer's on your website and you are in no position to speak to them, advise them, or help them at any point along that journey. So that's really good. Okay, fantastic. So thank you, Jasmine, for putting that in context for us. So moving on to the meat of this subject, what would you say are the key elements of a killer website UX that will help our listeners, our viewers, increase conversions for their business? Or some of them?
For some of them. So I'd say for me, everything starts with a purpose. And this ties in very, very nicely to marketing. And if we think of like Simon Sinek's, what's it called? Beginning with why. Just think about, why do you have this website in place? What are you aiming to achieve? What do people visiting the website want to get out of it? So that's the key of the conversion, because when we raise interest with someone, we want them often to want to check out what we're selling, gain it, become interested, self-assess if they are actually going to be buying from us, and then if they are the right fit and if they want to buy our products or services, then they're going to convert. So having that purpose clear in the back of our minds is going to help inform how the rest of the website is created in terms of user journeys, content structure, and our conversion points.
Right, absolutely. Really good point that ultimately the website is all about communicating the right things to the right buyer. So understanding that purpose, that why, is a great starting point. So on the subject of journey, the customer journey, what are some of the things that you would call out as being worth considering or important about that?
So being able to find what you need. If I'm a buyer, and based off of marketing intel, which you ought to have in terms of personas or insight from your sales team, you will know, for example, that when a person like Jasmine is looking at our services, considering if she wants to buy, use Teams, Slack, or Discord for her business, then you should know that I'm going to be looking for specific pieces of information. And that should then be presented on the website in a structure, in a manner that makes sense. So it's going to be slightly different depending on the use cases. But if you begin with that in mind, of knowing that, for example, Jasmine is going to be checking out the pricing pages, she'll want to know what other softwares this integrates with. For example, the business type that she works for is X, Y, and Z. That is going to inform the messaging that we have there, and it's going to make the journey much smoother. Knowing the journey in general also helps making sure that we add in a logical second step, which I think lots of people miss out on when they build their websites.
Right.
And with that, I mean is that we often create pages that we feel are necessary from an SEO perspective, or we need to present information for this industry, for this persona, but we don't have a clear purpose for that page. So we don't have a clear next step. We put information on there, but it's not clear who's going to read it and what we want them to do. So that's part of thinking through the journey of knowing what pages do we need to have, what information do we need to present, and how do we form that in a logical manner.
Yeah, I think you said it really nicely there, which begin with the end in mind, and understand after arrival, what will your visitor / buyer, what do you ultimately want them to be able to do, and then build the journey that satisfies their requirements in order to do that and gets them there is the way to create an effective customer journey, isn't it? And you touched on pricing information, which is probably something worth calling out specifically because it's a well-known friction point, particularly within SaaS, which is to say, buyers look for pricing. Doesn't have to be on every website. It's not the right solution in every single instance, but for consumable SaaS offerings, there is going to be a competitor out there that shows their pricing, and if you don't, you risk turning off the interest of that buyer that you've managed to get that far. So really worth thinking about that. When it comes to content and content structure, are there any points that you would call out there as being high priority?
So I think in general, nice word of the day is information architecture. That's in essence how you group pieces of content together to present them at the heart of the journey. What pages you put together and sort of what you name things so people can navigate to them easily. You want to make sure that you strip things back, because oftentimes, if you have a product or a service that people already have a good idea about what it is, so Slack, for example, they probably don't need to have a website that's 700 pages that goes through each and every really specific use case. It's just going to eat up a lot of time on their end to maintain and then try to keep up to date. So if you strip that back to the most essential pages that you need, keeping it simple and minimizing what you present to make sure that the information on the pages is clear, but also how the pages and pieces relate to each other, it's going to help a lot with just that clarity and making sure that, less friction is better for everyone.
Yeah. Bigger often isn't better, is it, when it comes to B2B websites in particular? More content doesn't mean you're going to get more time from your visitors consuming it necessarily. And actually, it's clear now to me that between information architecture and customer journey, there's a lot of interplay. And identifying the content that the user wants and needs and putting it on the logical, intuitive journey is a really good step to take. And I want to highlight, you mentioned, for example, it's common for businesses to want to put information into the architecture, into the journey, such as, sector specific information or persona specific information. But that information isn't necessarily on the journey that the user wants to take. And they won't visit it and they won't use it. And yet you're creating a cost to create something and maintain something. And I'm frequently referring to Nielsen Norman research that really identifies that website visitors typically don't engage with sector specific or persona specific navigation and content. For most buyers, it doesn't satisfy the task they're trying to complete. So it's often a little bit of a underutilized section, which can cost an awful lot to create and maintain. So that does indeed seem like a relevant point.
I think it's... Yes, I wanted to interject there and just say that when you try to speak to everyone, you are not talking to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like a really, really nice, clear example of that is how they're like within UX circles, a really prime example they tend to use is how the cabin bag was invented. So in the beginning of air travel, everyone had these big suitcases and were traveling around. And then someone thought of a new product. We have stewardess and airline pilots who need to just haul a couple of pieces of clothing between the different gigs or the different stops that they have. And they created a product, and it was marketed solely for airline staff. And then it spread because other people realized that having a cabin bag is good. I can also bring my, what I need overnight instead of having to check in this big luggage that I may not need to just be away for a couple of days.
Right.
So in being clear about what the use case is and who the intended audience is, they found a much bigger audience than if they had tried to sell this to the masses beginning.
Yeah.
So it's the same here with content and information, where you don't want to overwhelm the person there in terms of knowing where do I click next, what piece of information is applicable to me. It's more about surfacing what's important for that particular use case and person that you want to sell to.
Yeah, your ideal buyer in the first
Exactly.
place.
Your ideal buyer, your ideal customer persona, or business, helping them understand this price range is way too high for me, means you're going to have less conversions that you're not going to be able to sell to anyway in the end. Or I think you catch my drift. It's essentially helping people sift the information and make sense of it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Time poor, information rich buyers ultimately. So given that the goal in many cases is to get someone to convert, not into a top of the funnel lead necessarily, but into someone with a high level of interest and qualification, any thoughts on conversions and calls to action, which are quite often synonymous with those?
So one thing that we often forget about is, again, those building blocks that we don't notice when they're there, but if they're not there, we miss them. So in particular, social proof is one of those, where if you go to a homepage, you will often find a cavalcade of logos. And that's a way of people showing that, we have these amazing other companies that trust us with their business, so you should as well. You have product reviews where people are leaving thumbs up or other kinds of, what's it called when you get little stars?
Right, reviews, ratings.
Yes. So not ratings, that's the word. So not just in text, but all of that kind of information is going to help with conversion, because it's not just going to be an anonymous website with lots of nice branding. It also shows you that this is part of something bigger. When it comes to actual conversion point, you want to have very clear CTA, so call to actions. You don't want to just dump a big button in there that doesn't tell you what's going to happen or how you are converted when you click on it. So if you have a goal in mind where you want people to sign up for demos, for example, you need to be upfront and clear about that to your audience. You don't want them to feel tricked into having booked a demo with you when they think that they are signing up for something else.
Yeah.
So in general, it's utilizing those kind of, I don't want to say hidden elements because they're quite obvious, but helper elements like social proofs and other pieces that can help people convince themselves that, yes, this is something I should convert on. And for the actual conversion point, make sure that people understand what they can expect and then live up to that promise, because that all ties into a good user experience. It doesn't just end at the website. It all feeds back into the experience, really.
Yeah, I agree. I've written about this before on LinkedIn and other places because I feel quite strongly about saying no to bait and switch CTAs, either intentionally or less intentionally. It's so important to, if you say book a demo, that what the page you take people to also says book a demo, and you then offer a demo. Nothing worse for conversions than flipping the script, as it were, in between that button click and that experience, which is to say you thought you were getting a demo, but actually you're getting a sales call, or you thought you were getting a trial, but you're getting a demo. It can happen if there is any discrepancy between what's offered and what's given, it can really harm the conversion rate of the website. And even though it's desirable in many cases to offer a slightly better than is really available call to action, it's counterproductive in the grand scheme of things. Honesty wins there. It's perhaps a little bit of a tangential topic, but we've already mentioned that UX is a very broad practice. What about the technicality of it, website performance, and the underlying technology piece? Briefly, because it's not the core topic of today. Anything on that particular subject?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that people are very likely well familiar with Google's framework for usability. So in essence, you can just input your website to Lighthouse, or they've got some other tools. I just went out of my mind right now, but it will give you some feedback in terms of what the usability, the user experience of that page is. And from a technical perspective, we're talking basics like if I load a website and I try to click on a link, I don't want that link to suddenly shift because an image was loaded in its place and I click on something I didn't intend to. I am very impatient, and not just me personally, but most website visitors. So if the website takes too long to load, I'm going to assume there's something wrong, get out of there and go visit something else.
Yeah.
So all of this, again, can build frustration with the person who's on the website. So the best thing you want to do is offer seamless, smooth, effortless, frictionless, all those nice keywords that we like talking about when we talk about marketing as well, just to make sure that the website is there and serving me, and I don't have to think too hard or make an effort to interact with it.
So it's important, it sounds, to choose a stack or a platform on which to build the customer-facing user experience that's aligned to your needs and objectives when it comes to user experience. And I think that's a pertinent topic today because one very popular CMS had implemented a good thing, a security update, if I've read correctly, but caused a lot of websites to suffer outages because the businesses that use them don't necessarily have the resources on hand to maintain that aspect of the total piece. So really important to look at your technology through the lens of your objective, not just what you're familiar with or you're knowledgeable about from a brand perspective. So but we'll leave that for another day perhaps. Okay. You've talked about customer journey and information architecture, content structure, which are two connected issues, and I think one of the main ways that they are exposed and presented to the website visitor, to the hopeful buyer of our product or service, is the navigation of the website. So actually, before we go on to navigation, just got a question from the audience, so I'm going to bring that up here. Let's see what we've got from Robert here. So, on the note of smoothness and frictionless, would animation support or negatively impact the user experience? Well, brilliant. We were going to talk about this a little bit later on, weren't we? But we can have a little segue into the topic of animations now. What do you think about that? Does animation help or hinder a good user experience that leads to conversions?
So I'm a firm believer that you need something for people. So when you interact with a website, you want it to respond to you, not like a human. Again, not trying to bash AI, but I'm just saying it doesn't need to reply to you. You clicked my link. But we as users expect to be able to get some kind of visual feedback that what I've just done to the website sounds very mean, like I'm trying to hit it or something. But if I clicked a link or a CTA or clicked something in the navigation, I expect some kind of feedback to show me that you click this and now you've ended up on this page. In that way, I think that having animations or color schemes or something like that could be of real help, just to bring a little bit of life and flavor, and again, bring in the branding and the messaging as part of that. What can be troublesome is when you go overboard. So again, going back to the earlier, putting a Jack in the Box in the lobby of a hotel kind of example, if I say that you have to catch the navigation. It's a bunch of balloons that are going to go up, and then it's going to pop, pop, pop before you can click on the thing you want. That's way too much, and it's not going to be a nice user experience. But having animated elements on the website could certainly help liven what's happening as you're scrolling. But again, as long as it's not too much and overwhelming where you feel like you have to sit through a movie in order to actually take part of the next section. Do you know how you feel about that, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, it can help and it can hinder, right? And it does depend on how you apply it. And ultimately, there's animation that actually assists the user in understanding the website, like you say, the hover states, the click responses, and so on. Those are basically a good idea in most cases. And then there's the other extreme, which is, everything's moving and connected and part of one thing, which can actually, not only hinder the user experience, but also your editability and control of the website, internally. But two things that spring to mind is, if we think about the websites that are really put on a pedestal when it comes to visual design, user experience, and animation, often we find that their application of animation is very restrained or focused in areas that enrich the presentation of information. And the website that's in my mind when I think about this is Stripe, amongst others, which is, their website is highly designed, highly animated, but the animation is within the information. It's about making the information more digestible, more understandable. It's not about the experience being like a movie, like you said. So I think that tells us something about how they perceive the value of animation. And I was also rereading recently a blog post that HubSpot published when they redesigned their website some time ago now, but a lot of the findings hold true. And, they said that almost to their surprise, more constrained designs won when it came to variation testing for users' ability to understand the information and conversion. And so I think
we also... No, I'm just going to interrupt you there. Now, I think we also have to realize the fact that people don't have computers good enough to handle websites that require lots of heavy loading when they have a lot of animation. So you get the technical bit in there as well. What
probably is important to understand is that what we desire to do as marketers looking from the inside at our website quite often isn't aligned to what buyers want from it when they are discovering and researching solutions. So in answer to the question, thank you very much for it. It can do both. It can help or it can hinder. But I think it's really important to restrain oneself and look at it through the buyer's eyes, before we go off and create anything too whizzy that could actually just make it harder to use the website and harder to manage it. So balance and restraint is advised. Okay, so that's Dan's still going in the background, responding on LinkedIn for us there. Thank you very much, Dan. We were just about to touch on navigation, which I think is a critical component of UX, and it's responsible for so much of how the work that we put into content, information architecture, and the customer journey is perceived. So on the subject of navigation, what do you recommend for making it more effective?
So have a really deep think about what you actually need to put in a navigation.
First of all.
So that's part one. Second one is probably where on the page the navigation is featured. So we have the classical top bar navigation, we have side navigations, and then I know that this is a pet peeve of yours, but sometimes people put hamburger navigations on desktop, meaning that you've got your little icon in the corner that you have to click on for the whole thing to expand in order for you to have a look at what the navigation is. And yeah, I'm not a fan of that kind of, it works well for mobile where you have limited space, but not on a desktop, because you want it to be easy for people to spot where the navigation is, make sense of the headlines that they're looking at. So they know that if I click contact, I'm going to be put through to a contact page. Trying to formulate a thought here as I'm speaking, which turned out to be much more difficult than I was hoping. So in again, there in terms of naming things, it makes sense to look at it from the perspective of the people who are likely going to be using your website. So a blog, as marketers, we often want to have a blog on there. Do you call it a blog? Or do you call it a knowledge base? Do you call it an insight center? What makes sense for your audience? That's what you want it to be named.
Good point. Good point. Certainly, you touched on a pet peeve, and it's a peeve only because over the now quite numerous years that I've been looking at B2B websites, I've consistently seen that navigation that's optimized for the device or the screen that it's being presented on is the one that performs best. And while burger menus are a necessary compromise for a small mobile device screen, they are always outperformed when it comes to users navigating the site, going on the journey that you want them to, and finding the information they need by a traditional horizontal navigation menu. There are cases where you can argue a vertical navigation, but that's typically going to be more in e-commerce situations, and we don't see it being the best performing or the best choice in a lot of the cases that we work on. So yeah, definitely think that navigation is optimized for the screen and the user, not for the design and the designer, if that's the case. And logical naming of things, as you say. If it's a product, call it a product. If it's a service, call it a service. And if it's a combination of the two, then maybe just then you're allowed to use solution.
That will help. You mentioned there with e-commerce, and I think that they are usually a very, very good inspiration for how to handle complex navigation. Like if Amazon, that's a big example. I'm not really fond of their UX. I don't know why they keep on being a good example. Anyways, if you go to clothing stores that have online shopping, they usually have a very simple navigation because they don't want to overwhelm you with different choices. There's a women's section, a men's section, a children's section, and homewares. When you click on it, then it expands and gives you more choices to look at. So it's about not overwhelming the person of these are all the possibilities where you can navigate on our fantastic website. And you don't always need to have all of the sub pages accessible from the main navigation either. So you don't have to have, 10 stories deep worth of things in this is a sub to this to sub to this page kind of structure. So there are some pages where you want to be able to navigate to them. You don't want them to be orphan pages on the website where nobody links to them and they're just alone and sad in their own little corner. You want other pages to point to them, but you may not need to include them in the navigation. And then in terms of presenting, sorry, we're going to say something.
You just made me think about mega navs, and I was going to get your opinion on mega navs. Yeah. But it's up to you whether we go there or carry on your thought.
No, I think that probably jacks very nicely into what I was going to say in terms of how you present the navigation, because there's two different layers here always when you talk about UX. One is, if you just write it on a paper, what page do you want to include and what do you want to call it and what lives under what? The other bit is the design. So how do I interact with it when I'm on the website?
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, and that's when mega navs fit in.
Yeah, and the thing to watch for with mega navs in well, not just my opinion, in the opinion of lots of experts, is that you can very easily induce choice paralysis, where you present too many options because you've got all this great content, all these great offers that you want people to know you have. So you feel obliged to present them all simultaneously in one massive mega nav. But unfortunately, yet again, that doesn't actually give the buyer what they need and looking for from the experience, and can cause, well, either a whole heap of it goes, unnoticed or unused, or people just, freak and go elsewhere to get an easier experience. Because let's face it, buyers have a lot of pressures on them, and easy is, very, very attractive to them. So that's worth considering. So we touched on animation already, but looping back to that sort of topic, visuals, images, video, and the website user experience. Yes. Anything to say on the subject of how to use those?
Number one, yes, definitely. Please include. I am I am a person who, again, very impatient when I go to websites. For me, and I think for a lot of other people as well, having imagery and visuals in place helps you scan the page much, much quicker.
Mhm.
So just like we in a design see that when you have sections, you tend to have a headline that's bigger than the others. So you use fonts to sort of signify that this is the start of a new section that is going to provide you with new kind of information. You can use icons, imagery to convey the same kind of things. Pay more attention to this, or this is what's important. It can help contextualize. Also, jacking in a little bit to design and branding, it can help show a little bit more what makes you unique compared to your competitors. So, if we just look at three different websites that do the same kind of service, consultancy services. One goes very, very heavily on stock imagery. Maybe wouldn't have my trust because I don't know about them as business. The second one uses bespoke photography from their consultants, from their people that will give me a certain image of who they are. And the third one using bespoke logos and icons that's also going to give me a different kind of impression. So all in all, these elements can really help you when you create the page to make sure that you are guiding the user, again, this little journey, not just between the pages, but on the page itself, to quickly see that as a marketer, I want to pay attention to these two sections because they pertain to me, while the technical officer who we send in to also have a read is going to skip those sections and look at the ones that contain a quick show reel of what the software is going to look like, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're lucky at Blend that we've got not only UX designers, but a great design team as well that, show us all the time how to use images to enhance the experience, support the message, crucially, and tell the brand story at the same time. So those are the things to think about. And we talked about animation, which is to, apply it intentionally to, again, make the experience better, but not go overboard simply because you can, because it might have the opposite effect to the one that you desire. Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. Anything to add before we move on to mistakes that we've seen made again and again?
Maybe this borders a little bit the designy elements and the mistakes elements, but sometimes we can get very excited about adding neat effects in terms of animation and what's going to happen when a visitor is on the page, that we sort of forget what the experience is going to be like. And I think parallax has been around for a while. For those who don't know what it is, it's kind of hard to describe. It's like when you're scrolling, it loads the page in sort of a drawn out way. And then you've got scroll jacking, which means that if you scroll a little bit, it's going to jump you to the next section. And those are really cool. I personally don't like them because they take away the control from me as the user. Since I like to sort of constantly scroll a little bit when I'm on the page, it makes me feel a little bit more active and engaged. And then if that suddenly scrolls me to the next section, I miss out on reading stuff that was in the section before. So things like that, where we want to add a layer of design or a layer of effects, we also need to think about how is that going to land with the intended user audience and the page visitors. Are they going to appreciate scroll jacking, parallax, and I'm sure there are thousands more of these that I'm not aware of. And then apply it accordingly.
Yeah, I think anything that takes away control from the buyer is risky. Because for a lot of people that will be unappealing. And scroll jacking, it can be done well. I've seen it done well, but it's hard to do it well and know that you've made it part of the experience that isn't, problematic. So I think it is something to be very cautious about. Okay, great. I think let's dive into mistakes that we've seen made, because I think this will be the bit where we help, people watching really get some takeaways that they can probably go and find on their website now and hopefully remove and undo. So what are some of the common UX mistakes that should be avoided and ways that they can be improved upon or addressed?
So there's two opposites end here with people where people tend to end up. either they don't have a clear next step, so there's
Mhm.
no CTA on the page, or there's not a clear, what am I supposed to do now that I've actually like read through this information, or they have too many next steps. So they have too many CTAs peppered throughout the page that constantly allows you an out. And I'm not saying that we need to force people to read through everything that you have on a page before we offer them a CTA, but it's more about, again, thinking through those user journeys. If we want somebody on our homepage to get a sense for our company history, maybe it's not necessary to also point them to our About Us page, because they can find that through the navigation. This user journey should be focused on using that for contextualization and branding. And then after a couple of more sections, then we want them to go through to another page where they're actually going to be converting or looking at our products and services.
So call to action duration.
Definitely.
Good.
All
right.
Another one, and this is so tricky. I've been there myself when I've been working in-house, but also seeing that when we work with teams, it's the constant pull and push of what we as a business want to talk about versus what the website visitor wants to know.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I may want to say that we are the most fantastic products ever. And, I want to talk about all of these amazing features. But if the person visiting doesn't care, I shouldn't be presenting it that heavily on the website and promoting it. I should be focusing on other things within my messaging or within the pages that I'm creating and the user journeys that I'm setting up.
That sounds like it's very important to know your buyer well and to potentially observe or understand their experience, because that sounds like it's quite hard to get that right every time, first time. So that recommend some feedback is obtained around that one. Yeah, go on, you were saying?
Definitely. I think within all of this, you also have not having scannable pages. So using imagery, that's one way to help that, using lovely design to incorporate some branding, breaking up sections to make it easier for people to just, see if they actually need all of that information or not. And very, very quickly get a sense for, is this the kind of information I'm looking for before I'm actually going to dig in and read all of it. One thing we got into earlier, which is always being clear about what happens when somebody clicks something or do something. So when I convert on a CTA or I click on a CTA to go through my conversion points, is it a contact us form or is it a demo request? It needs to be clear so I know what to expect, because otherwise it can be quite jarring.
Absolutely. Okie dokie. Couple for me then, I suppose, which is I've always got some, because I think that UX is easy to get right and even easier to get wrong, I suppose, which is to say, like we've already touched on, and things I've mentioned on previous Demand Decoded and in our blog posts and content on the subject, which is there are things that are so simple they're probably beneath the level of UX, but they're things that people should simply abandon now, which is sliders on their home pages. Sliders are bad. Sliders are bad for SEO. Sliders are bad for user experience. They dilute.
Just to be clear, what do you mean when you say sliders? We're talking the same language here.
Getting me to clarify. I'm talking about. Well, that's a good question. Now I've got to think. What is a slider? It is typically a homepage hero section combination of text and images, which is going to whiz and show the visitor 3 or, heaven forbid, more statements. These could be stories that are timely. They could be news elements from the brand. They could be offers that they have, depending on where this brand operates. Or in most cases, they're just 3 different versions of the value proposition for 3 different audiences or something like that. But they are poor. The movement distracts the human brain, in an unstoppable way. The message doesn't get absorbed. It's diluted because it's said 3 ways for 3 different people. And so it's going to have a negative impact on the first visit experience, which is a critical one for your ideal customer before they go deeper into the site. So
in essence, it's 3 CTAs in the space of 1. So it's the same thing that we've been saying, it needs to be clear who you're talking to. There needs to be a clear next step or conversion, and don't just muddle all of them, onto the same page, because that's going to be a little bit of chaos.
Absolutely. So get rid of your sliders, get your value proposition clear and concise, and put it top and front and center. Say no to burger nabs on your desktop experience. There's no reason in most cases to go that route. And if you want people to find your content at deep levels, understand your offering, and ultimately convert, then you should do the things that make it easier for them to do that. We talked about industries and vertical content. It's got very, very questionable value to the buyer, so think twice before you incorporate it into your project to create a website. And then a slightly sort of odd one, which I don't see a lot of evidence support for, but in our experience, or some of the experiences that I've seen, I've found that contact pages, as in the page that people go to when they click contact us, can be really quite poor performers in terms of generating, qualified can, will, buy type inquiries. They typically get completed more by people who are trying to sell you their services, and we're all familiar with those types of conversions, which is frustrating. I've seen that when you get people to click a button and go to a contact page to tell you why they're contacting you, it can have a pretty poor conversion rate in terms of quantity and quality. Whereas making it possible for them to take that step, take that action elsewhere on the site, i.e. on the pages that stimulate the idea that they might want to get in contact with you, typically yields a far higher submission rate from that kind of form, and a far better quality. And I think the overarching goal of UX is to make it easier for the right buyer to take the right action. And you do so by removing the friction, but not the structure. So, taking away all signs and guardrails and recommendations, and structure from the buyer experience can be quite poor too. But you want to remove friction. And I think clicking contact us to go to a page which is generic in its meaning is a form of friction that can be improved upon if you remove it. So call them toxic contact pages internally at Blend.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I do have a little bit of a different opinion there, where I think that you can have a CTA that leads to a contact page, but you should most often try to have a contextual conversion where it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because the more friction you build in, where it takes more click and effort from the person, the less likely they are to abandon the process. And we can see this in basic things, like if I'm doing online shopping and I say pay for my stuff, and the first thing that pops up is, Jasmine, do you want to create an account? I'm going to say no, close that, and never come back. But if I can go through the process and either check out as a guest or be asked in the final step once I've committed, then I'm much more likely to actually sign up and create that account. So we don't want to do the same tactic where we sort of force them to give us information before we tell them that, but we can apply the same thought where keep it frictionless and effortless.
Absolutely.
It makes it a little bit easier.
Well, as if he has a crystal ball, Robert has asked a question which perfectly predicts our next segment, which is examples of user-friendly methods of obtaining feedback for the purpose of improving UX. That's a really good topic and question, because we were going to talk about trends and how you can identify them, and I think we touch on this when we were talking about that beforehand. Any suggestions for Robert how to obtain the right kind of feedback?
So before we go down the techer route, I'm going to throw a curveball and actually suggest having a sit down with a human. So on YouTube, you can find a recording of, and I completely forget the bloke's name, but he is amazing and has written a couple of UX books, one of them being UX Isn't Rocket Science. And I'm fairly certain that if you search for user interview, UX Isn't Rocket Science, it's going to come up, where he just holds a seminar for 30 minutes. In essence, what he does is that he pulls a person who's not going to be your primary user persona, not your primary target business, plonk them in front of a computer, have the website in front of them and say, I'm going to give you a task. I need you to find out what this website sells and then talk out loud while you do so. And in doing that kind of observation, you can see some really embarrassing stuff where for you who may have created it, it's super obvious, like just click that button, or this is what that sentence means. But observing people doing it means that you get firsthand experience of just those really, really glaring errors where, if things aren't making sense. And then you can refine that a little bit further by doing it with the user persona that you're after. And that's where tech can come in and help. And I'm just completely forgetting all the names of the different platforms you have. I do believe that Hotjar has got an extension for that now. You also have lots and lots out there if you just search for user testing or user interview. That will allow you, in essence, to set that up and say, I need to talk to people within this specific marketing segment, and I want to observe them as they are using the website and complete tasks to see what's happening or not.
Somebody just very helpfully posted a link to the Mike Lock video in the chat. So that's super useful. You've touched on some really, really good techniques and methods. Sitting down with people, can really reveal something that was hiding in plain sight, I suppose. And you can also get an element of that through heat mapping, through screen recordings and so on. Yeah, I think it's really exciting what Winter are doing at the moment. Pete Rajar, who obviously knows a thing or two about conversion rate optimization. And with Winter, you're actually getting your messaging, which is a key part of user experience, although it's not the layout and organization of things, it's still a key part of it. Get your messaging tested with your ideal customer, because of course the non-ideal customer that you just referenced will show you what's wrong about your UX from a navigation, discovery, presentation point of view, but they may not be familiar with the sector that you're operating in or the challenges. So, talking to your potential buyers or your customers about the things that resonate with them, are all ways to gather useful feedback on your UX. So that's a really good point.
Yeah.
What we were going to talk about was, are there emerging trends or technologies in website UX, and how can people stay ahead of the curve? And I think we had an interesting sort of anti-point to that a little bit.
Yeah, you don't want to lead a trend. So no, you don't. So the thing is that, again, where you have things overlapping and everything, I'm not talking about design, and I'm talking more about the building blocks of the website when we talk about user experience. And you want people to be familiar with what they can do on your website. You want them to go into your hotel lobby, clearly see where the reception area is, know what they can expect, and then you can instead wow them with the emerging trends, I guess, in terms of how you present the information. So the lovely, non-distracting, but there to elevate animations you may have, and the messaging. And that's what you can tweak and work on, but keeping the building blocks the same. Because you don't want people to end up on the website, and again, for some reason, I don't know why I had that example, but click a bunch of balloons in order for the navigation to appear, just because it's cool. And it's the same thing with trends. It can take a while for them to take hold. Yeah. And I just need, because I think it's a fascinating example where early days on the web, and you still get this, if you see like spam commercials, where if there's a CTA, a button, it looks like a button. And that's the way in the beginning, when you had anything on a website that you were supposed to click, it looked like something you could physically click. And over the years, we moved away from that. So now it's an established pattern of knowing that even if it looks like an image, it's a flat design. If it's got text that shows me I can click this and something is going to happen, it is a button. So that is something that is a slow moving trend that has changed. But I'm guessing that the first people who started doing it in the new way had a bit of trouble actually getting people to click those buttons.
Right. Yeah, perhaps. I think to your point that trends in this area seem to be quite slow moving. It's not changing radically, and I think that's supported by the fact that if you do go and look at research by Nielsen Norman Group, I think it's Nielsen Norman, not Norman Nielsen. Some of their research is quite old now. Some of it's 15 years old, but it still, for the most part, holds true. And I think that's very revealing, and shows that actually the trends when it comes to effective user experience that's aligned to what buyers want isn't changing rapidly. But there are some new technologies, as we've discussed, in Hotjar, in Winter, in user testing, and some old school methods as well for gathering important feedback about your user experience and for optimizing it over time. All right. Well, Jasmine, thank you very much for that. That was fascinating stuff. I think we'll wrap it up there, coming up to the hour. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. Be sure to follow the Blend LinkedIn page to join future live events. You can watch previous episodes of this on our YouTube channel, or tune in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Just search for Demand Decoded and you'll most likely find us. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.